this is where the Unit 7 Part 2 notes left off. And guys, this example is as hard as it's going to get. Yes, it's pretty difficult, but if you can do this, then you can do basically everything that you're going to be learning. You can do all these problems. So, what this video is going to focus on are the types of problems that you will see on worksheets, and most importantly on the test, that you'll have to be able to figure out, what's going on. If the parents are a certain genotype, what is the ratio of the offspring, and so on. So let's take a look at some problems. And basically it's all probability. That's what genetics and the study of genetics is all about. What's the probability I'm going to have a boy? What's the probability my boy's going to have blue eyes? What's the probability my girl's going to have light hair? Okay, stuff like that. And we can do that if we know the genotype of the parents. So you can predict probable offspring, both genotype and phenotype ratios for the offspring, if you know genotype and or phenotype of the parents. And this where it starts to get a little bit tricky, but here we go. So probability of having a big R, little r offspring versus the probability of having round offspring. Again, difference between genotype, what the genes actually are saying, versus the phenotype, what do you actually see in the organism. Okay, so let's take our big R, little r parents. Let's say they're both the same, big R, little r, and again, just match them up. Big R, big R, big R, little r, big R to little r, again, little r, little r. Remember, don't put little r before big R. It's going to start making these look different. You're going to start to think the ratio is 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 or something. It's not. So 50% chance of having hybrid offspring, right? And chance of having round offspring, right here, right, 3 to 1. Or 75%, same thing. So, given that the parent's genotype and number of offspring, you should be able to predict number for genotype and phenotype, be able to predict ratios too. So, here's our problem. So again, big R's for round, little r's for wrinkled. Our parent generation, or P1, is going to be purebreds. Purebred round and purebred wrinkled. We're going to see all the F1 offspring should be, and hopefully you're already starting to figure this out. And then using some numbers, alright, here's some math. If we're given a number of offspring in the F2s, created from F1s, how many will be one of each of these, or each of these problems? So we're going to go from 2 to 4, again just assuming 140 for all of these. Alright, so here's our first question basically. All of the F1 offspring will be what? Again, here's our parents. And I would suggest that you just always do these problems the same. Put the first parent on the top. So they're going to go up here. There's your big R, and then the other letter, of course. Big R. Alright, again, just be consistent. Always put the first parent on top, just to make it easy. So, second parent will go down here on the side. Of course, we have 2 little r's, homozygous recessive. So within you have, right, big R, little r, big R, little r. You should notice a pattern developing here. They're all going to be big R, little r, right? Because think about this, for meiosis, this is a gamete right here. Again, on your notes, put a circle, put a little squiggly line, make these into sperm. Here's a gamete. Circle, squiggly line, make it into a sperm. That's half the genetic information from one parent, half from the other parent. No choice but to have one of each. When you have one of each, you look like the dominant form, in this case, round. So, all of the F1 offspring will be heterozygous, hybrid, or round phenotype. Alright, so how many will have their parents' genotype? In other words, how many of them will be big R, little r? So again, the F1s, all of them were big R, little r. So here's our F1s, big R, little r. And I'm not sure if it's this slide that you guys have or don't have, but eventually these problems are going to run out in your notes, and if you just pay attention, you should be able to follow along. You feel free to write as much as you want down. Stuff you should be able to figure out to do on worksheets and of course on the test. So here we go. big R, right, for our first one. Pretty easy stuff, filling in the blanks. Again, put capital before lowercase when you have this scenario. And also down here. But don't forget, when you have that oddball, make sure that, I don't know, maybe make an obvious circle or something, because, you know, when you're doing Punnett squares, you're not going to have the shapes in there, obviously, you're just going to have letters. So there's our oddball, there's the runt, right? But we're looking for phenotype. The number of the F2 offspring, again, we'll start with 140, just, this will be given to you. So, of that 140, given the Punnett square that we can do, what percent will have the genotype that is the same as their parents? In other words, how many of them will be big R, little r? We can see that as 50%, so pretty easy math there, right? So 2 out of 4, 50%, 140, 70. Just different ways to calculate it depending on your preference. So here's your answer. 70 of the offspring, out of 140 offspring, will have their parents' genotype. Alright, so here's the next one. How many of them will have round seeds? Again, 140 F2 offspring given to you. After you do your Punnett square, what would you expect to have round phenotype? And again, law of dominance says that that would be 3 out of 4. So again, depending on how you want to do the math, 75% of 140 gives you 105. And again, if you ever have decimals, by the way, just round up or down. There's no such thing as a half an organism or a quarter of an organism or anything. So just round up or down. And again, how you do the math is up to you, but as long as you get the right answer, 105 will have round seeds. Alright, so how many will have wrinkled seeds? Again, number of F2 offspring is 140. You have to be given that if you're going to expect it to do any kind of work like this on the test or a worksheet. You got to be given the number of F2s. How many would you expect to have wrinkled phenotype? Again, that's 25%, 1 out of 4. So, how you do the math is up to you, but 1 out of 4 in terms of 140 is 35. So, 35 will have wrinkled seeds. How many of the same will have the same genotype as the P1? So that's going back a generation at the beginning. Big R, or little r. Starts to get a little confusing with the wording, but again, half of them, right? Here's big R, here's little r. Half of them will have the same genotype as technically their grandparents. Okay, that's F2. Here's the P1s. So technically these are the grandparents. Half of them will have the same genotype as their grandparents. Again, we've already seen this math, so how you figure it out is up to you. 70 out of 140 will have the same genotype as the P1. Again, the wording's different, math is the same, but you should be able to recognize when the wording changes how to figure that out. And then here's that slide I was talking about that is actual results. This is Mendel's work. So again, you can see the dominant trait here that you saw in that table I showed you that's in your book, and then the recessive traits over here at the end. Notice in those F2 generations, again, this is purebred times purebred, and then mixing all hybrids. So when you mix those hybrids, check out these numbers. I mean, when you're in the thousands and hundreds of pea plants and you're getting 3-to-1 ratios, again, 295, 282, you know, technically these are 3-to-1. That's as close as you can get to 3. So out of all these plants, out of all these crossings, you got 3-to-1 ratios. And so again, kind of making the point, and this is where the laws come from. You know, laws can only come from lots of data. And so this is lots of data, and this is repeatable. Okay, you can do this over and over yourself, and you'll get the same data, 3-to-1 when you cross hybrids. And so now that you've seen the genetics for it, now that you've seen how to do some of the problems, okay, as hard as it's going to get is those 2 trait crosses. A simple 1 trait, 4-box Punnett square should be something that should technically come pretty quick after we've done a few of them. It should take you, like a minute or less to do those, and including reading through the problem. So make sure you go through these problems a couple times. Make sure when you're doing these worksheets in class, they're not just copying down someone else's answer, because these are the questions you'll be asked on the test. If you want to fail, you can copy down someone's answer or give them your notes that you just took. Those are the things that you're taking the time to do it, learn it, and at least make it worth your time instead of just giving it away to people, basically allowing them to fail. Alright, I'm done ranting. Good luck.